Hi everyone! Welcome back to another episode of Coffee Chats with Claire. I'm eager to introduce Riana Sanjeevan, who recently graduated from UC Berkeley and is now a PhD student at Johns Hopkins. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Me too. To start off our conversation, can you please tell me about your study of cellular and molecular medicine?
Yeah, so I am a first year PhD student in Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. They have a bunch of PhD programs, but my program specifically is called Cellular and Molecular Medicine. And it's basically specifically biology research that's focused on looking for treatments for disease or different types of therapeutic development, even things like diagnostic tests for disease. Basically, I think people often classify biology research into kind of basic science research, which focuses more on, like, for example, what a particular protein does in a cell, or what's the structure of this particular protein or transporter. And then those kind of basic science discoveries can be translated through translational research towards, closer to treating patients or therapeutic discovery. And so when I was applying to grad school, I knew that I was more interested in the type of research that was kind of closer to treatment, closer to like the bedside, as they call it, as opposed to the more basic science research that I think people are often more exposed to in undergrad, just because I think at a lot of institutions they have a lot more of that, especially if they don't have a medical school.
Got it. Can you walk me through like a typical day or a week as a graduate student?
Yeah, so in the first year, I think it can feel pretty similar to undergrad. You take classes in the mornings. So specifically in my program, we take only one class at a time for like 4 weeks, or some of them are 8 weeks long. I know some other programs have a more like semester type schedule where they take 4 or 5 classes for a semester, but for us, they have us take one class at a time. And we've taken classes in things like anatomy, molecular biology, genetics, like cell structure, basically any type of like background research you would need, or background knowledge you would need for your research. They want us to all kind of be on a even playing field with that before we get started. And so as we take those classes, we also are rotating through potential labs we're interested in. So some programs have a system where when you get admitted, you will apply to certain labs and then get admitted to work in those labs. But I was looking for a program where I'd be able to rotate through different labs and kind of figure out what I wanted to do more, figure out what kind of environment I liked. And so I think these kind of rotational programs are becoming more common now, since people like understandably want to try out before they commit to something for like 4, 5, 6 years. And so in the beginning of the year, we like went through the list of faculty that are involved with our program. I think there are around like 150, which is a pretty like decently large program compared to others. And so everyone kind of went through that list, identified some faculty that they thought they might be interested in, and then kind of set up meetings with them, and then picked 3 or 4 to rotate with throughout the year. And so those rotations are around 2 to 3 months long. And that's kind of just for you to figure out if you like the research, do you like the environment, the type of work they do, and like how they do that work, and maybe like complete a small project in that time period. And so I think that's been really fun to kind of see the similarities and differences between labs, kind of pick out what you want and don't want. And also just it gives you the opportunity to kind of try out different things, because I know when I was coming into grad school, I kind of knew the field that I wanted to pursue, but I wasn't super tied to like, oh, I know I want to treat this one disease, or I want to work on this one therapy. So I thought it was nice that I had the ability to kind of try that out. So basically classes in the morning and then working in a lab in the afternoons, that's for the first year. And then I think at the beginning of your second year, you take like a qualifying exam, they call it. And that's like a long oral exam with a panel of faculty that can ask you kind of anything from the classes that you learned from your first year. And then if you pass, then you become like a full-fledged PhD candidate. And then from there on, you just do research for the next 4+ years.
That's so cool that you can interact directly with the faculty. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really smart. And also, it's cool that I'm also taking anatomy and physiology right now, and I'm taking
Yeah.
bio, so I feel like I can kind of understand some of the things that you were talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It
What
definitely is
do
very
you have
similar.
like a favorite class that you took so far?
I think I've taken a lot of I've taken a lot of similar classes to the ones I'm currently taking in undergrad, but I actually never took anatomy in undergrad. So that was something that I hadn't really been exposed to, and something that our program does that a lot of other programs don't is because we're like a really translational program. We have like a full anatomy lab during the class, like with human cadavers that have been donated. And so I think that was really interesting, doing a lot of different dissections and kind of seeing the things you might be doing research on, but like actually on a body in real life, kind of seeing what different diseases would present as and things like that. That was something that I never thought I would end up doing. And so that was really interesting and definitely a new experience.
How do you see your fields of studying evolve in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think there's a lot of questions about that right now. They're with the new administration. They are trying, I think, currently to put a lot of funding cuts in for the NIH, and a lot of these kind of translational programs and a lot of research in general is funded by the NIH, and research is super expensive. Like everything from paying for reagents that you need, buying like different machinery that you need, doing like preclinical studies on animals, even just like paying to keep facilities open and administration costs, that's all super expensive. And so I know that a lot of those funding freezes are going to court right now. And so I think we'll kind of yet to see what the true extent of that will end up being. But yeah, obviously, if the NIH funding does get cut in that way, there'll be a ton of repercussions for scientific research, and that'll really affect the type of, I guess, the amount of research that's able to be done and the quality that's able to be done. But I think more optimistically in the next 5 to 10 years, I think there's a lot of interest in working towards like prevention for different diseases or early detection, since even like regardless of the therapeutics available for a certain disease, like especially cancer, the earlier you can detect it, the better for outcomes. Like regardless if you have really good treatment options or a really good treatment or really good like cure rate for a disease, I think in general, the faster you can catch it and the more like widespread screening available, the better. And so I think in the next maybe decade, there will be kind of a push towards making that kind of screening more accessible, making it more sensitive, especially with the kind of recent, in the last decade, advances in like sequencing technology and ability to kind of sequence for different diseases, even from like taking a blood sample. I think that'll be a really like important advancement.
That makes sense. Let's shift back to your journey of how you got to where you are today. Where were you for high school, and when did you know that you'd be going into medicine?
Yeah, so I went to Los Altos High School, which is a public high school in the Bay Area. I was really lucky to live in an area with very like well-funded public schools. I really enjoyed like all of the schools that I went to, and I think I was really lucky to have access to like really good teachers, teachers that were really like passionate about what they were teaching. I think I was also lucky in that I kind of discovered what I wanted to do pretty young. I think it was middle school biology class. They started teaching us about genetics, and I thought that that was like the most interesting thing I'd like ever learned. I always knew I was interested more in like science than the humanities, but I think in like middle school and then obviously solidified in high school that biology was what I was really interested in, specifically genetics. And so since I knew that, in the summers in high school, I did a couple different summer programs. I think I started my freshman year just doing programs at like a community college. And then I did different like local programs at colleges in the Bay Area. I think there was specifically one called Rosetta Institute of Biomedical Research or something like that. And they had a summer program at Berkeley, actually. And there I was able to kind of do some basic biology research that I like didn't have access to in high school. And I also had an instructor who introduced me to the field of pharmacogenomics, which is the idea that an individual's like genetic composition or their genome can influence how they respond to different drugs or like their risk for certain diseases. And so I think I really like the concept that you could kind of translate genetic research and a person's genome into developing therapeutics for them or like making treatment decisions for them. Since I knew I wasn't really interested in doing clinical work, I knew I was kind of more interested in the research side, but I think knowing that you could kind of translate that research to treatments and treatment decisions, I kind of knew that was what I wanted to work towards. And so, yeah, I just kind of did other summer programs in high school. And then I applied for, like, in undergrad, I applied for a lot of molecular bio programs. But I think that experience is, like, not super common. I think most people don't know so early what they want to do. And obviously, like, in college, you can apply for something and then change. I think most people end up changing their major or what they think their career is going to be. So definitely take that with a grain of salt. Like my story is not is not super common, I think.
That's awesome, though. I remember learning about genetics in bio too, for
Mhm.
in 8th grade, and it was all over COVID, so I wasn't really like fully focused. But now that I'm
Yeah.
learning about it, I'm like regaining interest in it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I resonate with you. How about your major in college? What was your major, and were there any classes that inspired you to go into medicine?
So I majored in molecular and cell biology, which they abbreviate as MCB at Berkeley. And that major, I think, was initially designed for like pre-meds. So it has kind of all of the pre-med requirements that you would have to take. But also and because of that, there's like a lot of people in the major. So they have kind of a specialization you can do. I think there's maybe 5 or 6 at this point, but you can like specialize in immunology or genetics or like biochemistry. And so within that, I did the genetics specialization. And so then I was able to take electives that were kind of more focused on genetics or molecular therapeutics and things like that. And so I really enjoyed a lot of those classes. Of course, like a lot of the intro classes that you take in undergrad are going to be maybe not like super interesting to you or what you want to do, like math and physics. I always was like, oh, this isn't like applicable at all. But of course, like you have to do them as a STEM major. I think later in my like junior and senior year when I was able to take more electives was when it got more exciting. I also did a minor in public health. I think I always knew I wanted to do like a minor kind of related to healthcare, and Berkeley offered a public health minor that you can complete in one summer. And since I was there during like still kind of COVID, the end of COVID, and I couldn't really do anything else in the summer, I did that minor and I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's really useful even if you don't do a minor in something like public health. I think it's really useful for people who are interested in going into healthcare or going into research to maybe take a few public health classes. I think it really helps you gain kind of a wider, more zoomed out perspective on like health inequities or what different like disease interventions can look like. I think I even took a class on different types of health insurance and what the differences are between them. So I think unless you kind of experience it firsthand, you don't really learn about that in undergrad usually. And so I remember I was recommending that to like all my friends who were pre-meds. I was like, you should take this class. It's so interesting. And I think those classes are also kind of a nice break from the more like molecular bio classes that are really like memorization heavy and really like small scale. It was nice to kind of also be able to zoom out and see like a more broader perspective on the healthcare industry.
While in college, how did you try to distinguish yourself in such a competitive field while so many other students are interested in medicine?
I think I was lucky in that I knew I wanted to do research going into college. And so a lot of colleges will have programs for undergrads where you can like apply to work in a research lab. And so I did that my freshman year, and I worked in an academic research lab all throughout undergrad. That research was kind of more towards the basic science that I was talking about. It was focused on like different biological mechanisms that contribute to type 2 diabetes. And so I think it was a really good experience for me to learn that more basic research that's kind of required before like moving on to more translational research. And other than that, since that was kind of the more basic research, I prioritized doing like more translational type research in my summers. So I applied to different internships in biotech, like in industry in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has a ton of different like biotech jobs, a lot of pharma companies. And so I applied to a bunch of those in the summer after my sophomore year and after my junior year. So I did one internship at a company, like a small startup biotech company. And they were looking at like different genetic targets for drug discovery. And then my second internship was at a big company called Genentech. And that was also translational research. It was trying to look at something called a biomarker, which is like a protein or maybe a piece of DNA that you can measure in the blood to kind of track how well like different therapeutics are working, or kind of track how well, let's say you're like doing a clinical trial and you have like blood samples from all these patients and you want to see if you can like tell when the treatment is working. You can use it for things like that. And so I think both those experiences really like solidified for me that I wanted to kind of work towards that more drug discovery or therapeutic discovery research, since I really enjoyed kind of working closer to the clinic. But I think in general, any way that like people can get involved in the field that they hope to go into in the future, whether that be like applying for different programs at your school, or if that doesn't work, I know tons of people who just like cold emailed professors if they were interested in their research, or like went up to professors after class and said, "Oh, I like really liked what you talked about. I was wondering if you had any openings in your lab for students." I think as long as you kind of put yourself out there, something will turn up. And as long as you're kind of putting in that effort, I know most people ended up finding opportunities like that, which are really helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really inspiring that you reach out and you put yourself out there. I think that's really important.
Mhm.
I think, um, what were some of the most significant challenges that you faced early in your studies, and how did you overcome them?
Um, I think a significant challenge kind of in the path was just the process of like applying to grad school to do a PhD program. I think there, at least at Berkeley, was a lot of resources for people applying to med school. And so I think people applying to med school had more of a concrete idea about like, oh, I need to take the MCAT. I need to do this sort of like clinical work or shadow physicians, or I need to like do this type of research. But I think the process of kind of applying for a PhD seemed like much more mysterious to me. There wasn't really anyone that I knew that had applied for a biology PhD, or anyone in my family. And so I was kind of, I think I was kind of confused as to what requirements you had to reach in order to be like a competitive applicant. And so I remember I talked to a lot of different advisors at my school, different like professors that were high up in my MCB program, to kind of get their perspective and what they thought would be possible. But I think one issue with that is a lot of them had applied to PhDs and done their PhDs like decades and decades ago. And I think the process has changed a lot since then. I think like back in maybe the 80s and 90s, as long as you had done like some sort of research in undergrad and had good grades, you would be able to get into kind of any program just because there were less people applying. And so when I talked to a lot of these professors, they would say like, oh, you have research experience, like you have good grades, you should be able to get in anywhere. Like just apply to a few schools and like it'll be fine. And then on the other hand, when I would look online at different forums, people would be saying, oh, you need to, or most applicants already have like worked in industry for several years, or most people have like published several papers, or just a lot of things that I didn't have at that point as an undergrad. And so I was kind of getting like two different perspectives, and I wasn't sure how many schools to apply to or like what caliber of schools to apply to. So I kind of like, I guess, played it safe, and I applied to like, I think I applied to 12 programs, which is a lot more than what the professors had recommended, but I wanted to be safe. And so I applied to like a different range of programs, some really competitive programs, some like not so competitive programs, just because I think it was kind of hard to tell what was expected. But I think along that process, I learned that even though, of course, it would be nice as an applicant to have multiple papers and to have worked for, 5 years after college, I think as long as, at least in my experience, as long as you have a good amount of experience in undergrad and you can kind of show that you did as much as you could and be able to talk about it in a way that kind of shows that you're passionate about it, and in your essays write about what you want to research and why. I think it definitely is possible, and that if people are interested in pursuing a PhD, like it doesn't hurt to apply. If it doesn't happen, like you can always apply the next year. I think that is definitely a perspective that I didn't really see online, that kind of a perspective of applying straight out of undergrad. And I think it is getting more common these days. And so I think that would have been nice for me to know.
And in closing, I'd like to see what advice you would give to someone in high school who's interested in pursuing a career in medicine.
Yeah, I think what you're doing right now is like really great. I didn't even like think of doing something like this in high school because I think there's so many different careers in the healthcare medicine field that you will like never know about until later in your life unless you like specifically reach out and talk to people like you're doing. I think a lot of people think, oh, the medical field, you can be like a doctor or a nurse, or, if you go into research, you become a professor. But there really is so many other things you can do. Like, there's so many different careers in the medical field, like other than becoming a clinician. There's so many different types of research you can do. And there's so many different things you can do with a degree in like biology or something similar. So I think, yeah, doing what you're doing is super useful. I also think it's important to remember that like when you go into undergrad, you can really like pivot to a lot of different things. I know people who came into undergrad as pre-med and then switched to something completely different or did the opposite. Your like options are still really open. So I would say like even if you think you know what you're going to do, keep an open mind. It can always change, and that's not like a bad thing. And I guess for people in high school, I think it's important to kind of, I guess, explore like options that are available to you in your town or maybe like in your state. I think it's a really good idea to kind of take advantage of the summers that you have and use that as a way to explore different options, whether that be like through taking community college classes or looking for like different programs available at colleges in your area. I think the summers were definitely a really valuable time for me to kind of refine the options of what I could go into, or to kind of discover what I really liked about the field that I thought I wanted to go into. And so, yeah, I think anything that kind of involves learning more about the field that you might be interested in or talking to different people like you're doing is all super useful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to share your experiences and your advice. And I would love to have you back here in sometime in the future, back on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. I wish you luck in all of the learning about different options that are available to you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on another episode of Coffee Chats with Claire. See you all soon.